So when you're ready to record, all you have to do
Hey, Gene, are you in the room? Oh.
Hi, this is David Chaplin. We are having the class for the skeleton crew.
Instructions. Yeah, and then ask exactly how to do it. Well, and he's really bright because I have also the training grant. So he was on the training grant for the summer course. They taught him, and then, he was on the summer program. So I was really happy with it. And I'm like, I got to get the Hey. Oh. And what great weather today, huh? Just awesome. I didn't even listen to the rental car had a Sirius trial, Sirius radio, because there's parts of Mississippi and Alabama where there's no radio except things I don't want to listen to. So I didn't know until I got to Tuscaloosa that this weather was right behind me. I was like, oh my gosh.
Hey, Dr. Chaplin.
Who's that?
This is Brian.
I thought so. Hey, it's Paula.
Okay, hey, I didn't know if we were still doing it this morning. I am having to stay home to keep an eye on flooding, and I just didn't know if you guys were still doing it on that end.
We are. Jean has walked me through how to set everything up, so I will record. We have several people joining by GoToMeeting. We're going to wait to start till 8:15 to give any people who wanted to come but didn't get the message that we were on schedule the chance to get involved. So anyway, Brian, if you can, my understanding is I just need to push the stop recording button at the end.
Even made coffee, Brian.
And that's actually Brian, who's our media expert here. So anyway, okay, Dr. Gregory. So the pointer doesn't work on this kind of TV screen, as you don't know, so you have to use the arrow, and if you try to look at the screen to make it go, you either have to have very good, much better motor skills than me, but if you look here, it's just, you can either use the mouse to make the arrow,
Gotcha.
but you don't have to use it.
Okay. All right. Well, good morning, everybody, and thanks for being here, the people who are physically here, as well as people who are virtually here, because it looks like I might be staying for a while based on this weather. Ay, ay, ay.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Move that out of the way without
How do I?
cutting everybody off. So
No, how do I?
advance.
Yeah.
I think it's, if this will work. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
All right. So abstracts are not my expertise, but good writing and writing grants is. And so I think one of the most important things, and what I've tried to do with a lot of these, I've got hyperlinks within the slides so you can go and read the articles. I started thinking about, and the thing is, your abstract is really the thing that makes the first impression on people, or the only impression. If you're submitting an abstract to a meeting, the only thing they have is that abstract to judge your work by. So and the challenge is it's short, it's small, it needs to be concise, it needs to be interesting, it needs to be informative, it needs to get across the significance of what you're looking at, etc. So there's a lot of challenges in packing all of that into just a simple abstract. And I think that's something I want you to keep in mind, that it's not an afterthought. It's the way to present what you've done and what your lab is doing and what your group is doing to the world. And I think one of the examples I have are the abstracts from NIH grants. Those are the only thing that's public about your grant. So that's really all that anybody else sees about your grant. So you really want to do a good job on the abstract. You know, maybe you never thought of that before, but let's just think about it. So, you know, the first time you get asked to write an abstract, you're probably thinking, what? What exactly? And I know for most of us, you know, we are detail people. We love the little molarities and how many minutes they were exposed and how many patients were enrolled. But for an abstract, you really have a limited amount of time and space to put that. So you have to think more in terms of like triage, like an emergency room. What's the most important thing that I've got to get across in this abstract? What is my best piece of data? What is the most significant thing about the study that we are doing? And you need to get that across. And then the details can come in the actual, the rest of the slides or the rest of the grant or the presentation. But if they miss that point, you kind of missed your mark. So it's a concise summary of your entire proposal or study. And let's be honest, if you're writing an abstract for a meeting that's almost a year away, a lot of times you don't have all that data. So, you know, I think that's one of the things that's really tricky with abstracts for meetings is kind of what do you present and what do you kind of keep to yourself, or what, you know, preliminary data do you have that you may or may not want to present in the abstract. So we're going to talk about three types. There are publication abstracts. Those are actually in some ways a little easier because by the time you're writing a publication, you have all the data. If you don't have all the data, don't write the publication, okay? However, every journal has a different set of rules for how they want the abstracts organized. And clinical journals tend to have a little more structure than basic science journals. Meeting abstracts. These are where you're presenting your results and you're either trying to get a platform presentation, oral presentation, or a poster presentation. Either way, frequently for a meeting, you may not be completely 100% done with everything because of it having to go in so many months in advance. So again, we'll talk about, you know, how do you kind of figure out what to show and what not to show. And then grant abstracts should present hypothesis-driven research. No matter what you're doing, if you don't have a hypothesis, old people like me reading your grant are going to go, well, what's a hypothesis? You know, I don't really care that he has 100 mice. What I care is what is he trying to do? So you want to make sure that you get all of these things across. So we'll start with grant abstracts because I'm the most familiar with those. And I'll be honest, I write my abstract when I'm totally done with the grant. But actually, I think that's the best way to get like a 50,000-foot view of the study that you've done. So you want to introduce the reader to the problem that you're addressing, the overall hypotheses you're testing, the main techniques that you're going to use, and your overall plan. So what do you want to, explain what do you want to do? Why is this work important? What has already been done? If possible, you can put that in the abstract. How are you going to do it? Oops. So let's just look at this. What you intend to do. Again, most basic scientists, you guys are going to dive right into this molecule and this other molecule. Why would anyone care? So we're going to talk about it. I'm going to say it about 100 times this morning. The first sentence needs to be interesting. Get people's interest. Don't tell me that people die of cancer. I know that. You know, tell me that this cancer is very rare, but 80% of kids who get it die. That's much more interesting than telling me that only 3% of kids get this type of cancer. So you want to get something that hooks the reader, gets them interested. And this is just good writing. This has nothing to do with the science itself. You've got to get across in that very first sentence, what is going on here? What are we looking at? And if you, this is my other favorite, the first sentence that has this molecule's involved in, and you list diabetes, cancer, lung problems, COPD. What are you studying? Don't give me a laundry list of things. Get right to the point, especially in the abstract. You've got to get to the point right away. This molecule is involved in lots of things, including the thing we're looking at. So, you know, get the reader engaged, get the reader interested. Be sure that you think about the structure of your abstract. Don't write a lot of long sentences. Don't write a lot of short sentences that are kind of da-da-da-da-da. You kind of want to have some long sentences and some short sentences, and then try to go back through once you've got it written and look at it. Is it, oh, I didn't realize this sentence is 4 lines long. That might be a little bit too long. And especially if you have to say the latter and the former, if you have to add all that into your sentence, it's too long. Why is the work important? Again, some things it's going to be just obvious. If you're telling me that you're studying diabetes, hopefully you don't have to tell me. Most people know diabetes is a big problem. So what you want to think about is also, where are you sending this? Why is this work important where you're sending it? So if you're sending this to NIDDK at the NIH, they already know that diabetes is important. And you might want to even kind of quote back to them. The NIH has found that blah, 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 blah. Oh, wow. If it's something for your society, and this is a society, a professional society that focuses on a specific health problem or a specific area like the American Thoracic. What part of the thorax are you looking at? What is the important issue that you're looking at? What's already been done? Now, this is not a background. This is not a literature review. But what you're trying to introduce is where's there a gap in our knowledge? We know that lots of people have this. What's not known is this. Our study is designed to fill that gap. Thus, you should give us money. So I think those are things, and again, you think, well, how can I get all of this into an abstract? Each of these things can be one sentence. So now, right now, we're just at 4 sentences. Maybe really long sentences. So keep these things in mind. And again, part of it is get some stuff down on paper and keep kind of going back and working it over, because the abstract, I find, tends to change, even as, and my grant tends to change sometimes as we're writing it. Oh, what if we did so-and-so? Ah, great, we're going to add that in. Don't forget to add it in to the other things. So let's start with a good opening line. And I pulled one from somebody's grant. And if you see, I don't know if I would call this a good opening line. First off, it's two opening lines. But secondly, we really don't get to the point until we get right to the second part. Renal fibrosis, primary determinant of end-stage kidney disease. I would have started out with that before I had all the nephro, whatever. Yeah, what is all, yeah. So that first sentence is kind of a snoozer, if you ask me. Maybe important to the people that work on it, but it's also eating up, you know, for abstracts, you have a limit in either how many characters or how many lines you can have, and you wasted. And to me, that's wasted. I would start with the most important thing. And then I pulled some, oh, I'm not sure if you guys, I know everybody always says it. I know you can't see this, but there's a hyperlink to this abstract on NIH. So I pulled a couple people, excuse me, from NIH, with NIH grants who are from UAB, since y'all are from UAB. And I really didn't just pick either ones mostly I tried to pick ones I thought were good, because I don't want to show you people who wrote a bad one. However, I thought this was one that I liked, the way that the opening sentence, I thought that there were a lot of good points in here, but there's a lot of technical jargon. Now, this is an R01, so there should be a lot of technical jargon. And if you look at this, this person's had the grant for 15 years. So I will say one of the things you will notice if you look at abstracts on the NIH website, people who had grants for a long time tend to write the most generic abstracts because they've had the grant for 15 years. Why should they put any details? I guess. I'm not really sure. And partly because a lot of them probably have a lot of preliminary data that they don't necessarily want to show in an abstract. So I think those are things that, you know, when you go and look, if you're writing an abstract for your grant proposal, this is one of the things that you can do is go to the NIH reporter and pull up some of these, especially if you find them you can look for them in your area and then find some that you really like and use them as a model, or some that maybe you don't like. And what is it you don't like about it, about the way it's written? One other thing about NIH grants, just an aside, is this little part right here. Mr. Mouse. Oh, oops. Here. The public health relevance. Y'all, and I say y'all. This is supposed to be written in lay language. Here's why it's important. My friend is Francis Collins, the head of the NIH. And Francis told me how he got these phone calls from congressional staff. And they wanted to know why the NIH was funding rafts, studies of rafts. Don't we have rafts? Don't we understand rafts? Well, if they had written their public health relevance more clearly for the lay public, they would have understood that these lipid rafts are in the cell membrane and they're important for drug response. But they didn't. They wrote it in scientific language. So then he had to explain why they had spent $2 million on studying rats. So I'm just saying, this whole thing, your abstract and your public health relevance of your NIH grant are going to be online. They're public data. So do a good job on them. And even, I mean, the public health relevance doesn't have to be long, but it needs to be really straightforward, simple. So here's another one. I tried again to also find some abstracts that were on very different topics. I thought I like this one. The first sentence, functional decline in patients with mild cognitive impairment is an important issue in dementia research. Makes sense to me, and I don't know anything about dementia. So again, now I want to find out what are they going to look at? What are they going to do? I want to read the rest of the abstract. And the other thing about abstracts, y'all, is they're short. So if people don't get hooked at the right away, just flip to the next one, right? If it's short, you don't feel oh, that's interesting. I'm not interested in that field, but I wonder what they're doing. Now, for all of these, the other thing I saw is they included their aims from the actual grant, so that even if that's just minor, it's in there so you know what their main goals are for this project, which is different from when you're writing an abstract for a meeting or for a paper. And here we have another one. Seems there were a lot of kidney ones. I'm not sure why. And I thought this was interesting because ciliopathies or ciliopathology is not exactly like a barn burner. You know, it's not like cancer. So to make a problem with your cilia interesting, I thought they had a challenge. And I thought they did a pretty good job at this. And like, for example, here, they say mutations in multiple genes have been identified in these patients, but they didn't give us the laundry list of what the genes were. Really, don't bore me to death. Just tell me what you're studying. Okay? So I think it's really, this is probably one of the most important things that you can keep in mind. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it. But that's really hard. The things that you understand the best are probably the things you know all the details, and it's harder to kind of simplify it for people than something that maybe you kind of know, but not so much. So that's something to keep in mind and think about is how can I, and I'm not saying make things so simple there's no data. That's not what we're talking about. But you want basically any scientist to be able to pick up and read your abstract and have an idea, if not all the details. What the heck were you studying and why in the world is that important to study? If you can't get that across in the abstract, you've really lost. And especially if it's being picked for a meeting, you've lost your chance. So any questions about grant abstracts? All right, now it says, yes, I do.
So wait a second.
Oh, okay, he has the audio. I think we went back to.
Sorry, our screen went blank. And
Yeah, oh, sorry. Yeah,
it's coming up, I
we had a
think.
little lightning strike close. So, scared the computer.
Okay, I'm just curious if everybody can hear again. It would be good if one of you could type in a chat message to tell us whether you can hear. Okay, so we're back on.
We're back on. Awesome. Great, great. So I think, again, different abstracts have different purposes. The purpose of the grant abstract is to summarize your grant idea, what it is you want to do, why it's important to do it. We have a question?
Can I ask a question? So Dr. Zengul has a question about the hypothesis and how to handle it in this kind of, in this format. So in his research, I'm just going to read verbatim, so because I'm not sure I could paraphrase it in a better way. So in his research, he uses secondary data and data mining. And he recognizes that data mining and statistics have a lot in common, but they're pretty different in that data mining often doesn't come with a, they don't start with a well-defined hypothesis sometimes. So both data mining and statistics look for relationships in the data. However, statistics starts with a well-defined proposition and hypothesis, while the latter starts with a loosely defined discovery statement. So if you're starting out with a loosely defined discovery statement, how do you put that in as part of an abstract in a way that is really positive? And how do reviewers tend to react to looser questions rather than very refined, discrete questions?
Wow, that's really a good question, and I think that it's a huge challenge for you. One of the things I would say is, as long as this is a grant proposal, there will hopefully be some reviewers from your field in there, so they understand that this is the way that the field works. But I think still people like to see, and it doesn't have to be called a hypothesis. We've looked at this thing and we think they're related to each other. That's a hypothesis. We've got these two sets of data. We think that there's something important in there that we're going to be able to pull out. You don't have to call it a hypothesis. It doesn't have to be formally stated, but you need to explain to me why you're doing this. And that's what the hypothesis really is. And I think you need that in any abstract, but especially in a grant abstract, because you're asking for money to keep doing something. Why is it we need to do it? I hope that, and again, I think you need to realize that there will be reviewers. There'll be reviewers who are more in your camp, and they'll say, oh, this is how we do things, etc. But not every grant, especially like the K grants or the Fs, they're not always going to be experts on just that one little area. So you need to hold their hand and help explain to them why analysis of secondary data is important and how it mines and finds, this has been used and found lots of things. Maybe not in the abstract itself. But I think in the abstract, I would say we're looking at this thing and we think they have something to do with each other, and we're going to mine the data to see. That seems reasonable to me.
So he's working on a K type of grant. I'm not sure which K mechanism exactly, but so the same issues apply, I think.
I think especially for a K, depending on what institute you go to too, they may have more or less understanding of data mining. And so you need to make it very clear to the reviewers. In the Ks, the reviewers are a little more, I don't want to call them generic because I've been a K, we have expertise, but we also have expertise in career development and faculty development and things like that. So we're looking for reasonable science, and we're looking for good candidates at a good place. And I think in his case, we're looking for good data sets that he's going to be using. But I think in the K, you need better explanation than you do in an R, which is going to go to a very specific study section, or to an abstract that's going to a meeting, which is very specific as well. So everybody's not speaking the same language you are when you send in a K award.
So I don't know if these microphones really work, so I'm sorry, I'm going to come
Okay,
closer.
yes, come to.
So I just want to add, my own perspective is that I think you can almost always turn whatever the question is that is motivating you into a hypothesis. It may seem sort of awkward or too obvious or something, but to me the reason why it's worth doing, even if it seems artificial to you, is that if you are stating what you're doing in terms of something that you're trying to distinguish potentially different outcomes, that gives the reviewer or the reader a chance to assess whether they think it's likely that you'll be able to do what you're claiming.
Right.
And if you never define the question clearly, then there's much greater concern that you won't end up making, getting anywhere
Being
specific. So the hypothesis is a sort of checking in with the reader that you have outcomes that you're going to focus on, and the rest of what you do is to make it clear that what your approach is going to be reasonable for answering, but helping you distinguish between the potential outcomes.
Right. And I totally agree. I think the other thing, kind of the other way I phrase it, is feasibility. As a reviewer, what I'm looking for is the feasibility of this actually being successful. So if you don't have kind of a question that you're trying to answer, how is all that going to work? But I think the other thing is sometimes the hypothesis is kind of obvious. I write training grants. Our hypothesis is if we train people, they will do well. Well, that seems kind of stupid to say. So we try to say it in a more fancy way, and that we're going to measure how well they do, right? But there are some fields where the hypothesis, just stating it formally, our hypothesis is a little, I don't necessarily know that you have to state it as a hypothesis, but you definitely need to make it very clear, what is your idea? That's your hypothesis. And what that gets to this feasibility. If you don't make them understand what your idea is, how do they know whether you're going to be the whole rest of the thing presenting how you're going to do it? Any more questions?
No.
Oh, awesome. Phew. All right. So here's another abstract. I'm not sure why I put this in here. I think it was because it's got a really long sentence with lots of parentheses, etc. But I also made it bigger so we could kind of get an idea of those first sentences. I would be very careful, again, of using lots of, starting off with something that's a acronym or whatever. Oh, great. STLMN, STK11, really? Okay. So start off maybe by saying Poitz-Jaeger has, which is the syndrome with so-and-so, and so-and-so is involved by mutations in this gene. Rather, just flip the sentence around. One of the things I've noticed a lot of people do, they'll put the most important part of the sentence at the end. And you have to think about the emphasis. So if lots of people die of cancer, but only a few people have whatever. If this whatever thing is the thing you're studying, and it's the important part, start with that. So make sure you read over your sentences and make sure that the emphasis is on the right part of the sentence. You know, we know this, but we don't know that. Therefore, we're going to study this and work on your transitions between sentences, which I think is really important. It keeps you from having really long sentences. You know, if you go from here, and he's got, you know, if they, although this, I like this, although this encodes da da da, as yet, no unifying hypothesis has explained how this works. Therefore, the long-term goal of our project is to figure this out. Oh, awesome. So there's something people don't know, and these people are going to study it, and they're going to come up with an answer.
It does look like the first and second sentence could be combined.
Mm-hmm.
Because, as you point out, the whole thing that they're studying, this LKB1, isn't discussed until the second sentence, but that's their highlight. That's what they want to focus on.
Right.
Instead, you know, you're led to believe they're going to talk about this STK11.
Right. See how it,
mentioned.
that's, so again, kind of putting in this laundry list of things, especially in the abstract. You can expand on that in the actual grant because the STK11 person may be your reviewer. But if your primary focus is this LKB1, you know, stick to that. And I think because he was sending it to NCI, starting off, I would have started off by talking about Poitiers. You know, Poitiers does so-and-so, and then one of the things involved is this LKB1. And just take that other thing, put it somewhere else, you know, put it somewhere else in the grant. So again, don't confuse people as to, you know, what is, don't make it confusing. This is short. They don't have time to sit down and say, oh, let me figure out what he was trying to tell me or why he told me that. And don't put a lot of extraneous stuff in there. Very important. All right, so, excuse me, abstracts. Yeah.
Sorry, say one more thing about,
Yeah.
So Dr. Gregory has made, you know, try to emphasize how to catch a particular reader's attention. And I think it's just really important to realize that in the grant review process, there are probably 3 people in a committee of somewhere between 12 and 20 who have read your grant in detail when they walk into the room. But everybody has to score your grant, and everybody's score counts equally. So, and they don't have time to read the grant while they're in the room, but they do have time to read the abstract and to read the specific aims page. So that's why we spend so much time really focusing on those 2 things as areas that need to be as perfect as possible. Anyway, I just want to be sure you recognize that, you know, there are people sitting here and they're listening to the primary reviewer who's going to talk about your grant in detail. I'm not as good at doing that as a lot of people are. So when I'm talking about it, people are looking at the abstract to try to figure out what's really the most important. And that's, you know, so you really need to help yourself as much as possible with what you write to make sure that in the setting where you don't have the most articulate reviewer or somebody who may not be as expert as you hope they'll be in your field trying to explain what you're doing, that a person can look at it and very quickly get a sense of whether this is important or not and whether it's likely you're going to be able to succeed. So that's...
No, I totally agree. And I'm preaching from the same pulpit. The abstract and the specific aims are critical to how the whole study section feels about your grant. Again, because we don't have time to read everybody's. Sometimes we don't even have time to read somebody's specific aims page, so we just look at the abstract. And again, it's that first impression. If I read it and say, well, that sounds kind of interesting. I want to find out what they're doing. Oh, that's neat. I have a better impression than if I read it and go, what the heck is this about? Organize. The reviewers are busy people. We teaching classes, we are running programs, etc. If I can't find the stuff I need and want to see in your abstract or your specific aims page, if it's all kind of just seems almost like hand waving and jumble, I'm like, No, I don't have time for this. So the better organized things are, and that goes on to your candidate part. When you talk about yourself as a candidate, don't just reiterate your bio sketch. Tell me something unique. I had someone at NIH, and his second sentence on his candidate background, it's kind of uncomfortable, but yeah. He said, I'm the first person from my family to go to college. All right. And now he's at NIH as a postdoc. This is somebody who's clearly hardworking. And he's not saying I'm brilliant. He says, I'm hardworking. So you want to put things in there that give, in the candidate background, something, flavor of who you are. As well as in your plan for your career development. These are the things I know how to do. These are the things I need to learn how to do, and here's how I'm going to learn how to do it. Get it organized. I love it as a reviewer if I can find things. If I'm going, he's going to work with this guy. Who is this guy? I don't know. Whatever. He's going to use this, we're going to use this mouse. We're going to use this mouse. We're going to use this mouse. Where'd the mouse come from? Oh, we made it. Well, that's, you want to, if possible, say things like, we've already created a transgenic mouse for this, and now we're going to characterize it. That makes it much more feasible. If I don't know whether you're getting the mouse from somebody else or whatever, feasibility. If you're doing a clinical study, we're going to look at patients, 110 patients. How many patients come to your clinic? Oh, 110. Well, maybe that's not going to work. Or you have 500, and of that you hope to get 110. Now it seems much more feasible. So you need to get the facts out there wherever possible to clarify the feasibility. How are you going to convince people that you can do this and that you're the one to do it? If your lab was the first, our lab has already shown blah, 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 put a reference in there. We were the first to show blah, blah. Now, one thing I will suggest, if there's two ideas of how this mechanism works, you don't have to say that other idea is stupid. Because for sure, if you say that, then that person, one of those people is going to be your reviewer, right? It's Murphy's Law. Instead, what you may say is there are two ideas of how this works. Our preliminary data, blah, 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 has shown, and based on this data, we're going to do this. Therefore, you're never saying that that's a bad idea. You're just saying the data that we have has led us this way. And they're, oh, okay, no, that makes sense. So, get things out there that really show, I'm good, my lab's good, we got lots of stuff, we can do this, give it to us in a kind of subtle way. All right, so abstract for scientific meetings. We're going to assume that for a scientific meeting, there's a very much more focused area, and that these are going to be other scientists in your area of expertise. A lot of abstracts for scientific meetings have a very specific format they want you to follow, either size or whatever. Y'all, follow it, read it. There's nothing makes me madder. So I do this thing, we have like 80 medical students present posters, and we make an abstract book, and we give them a template, and then they do it totally different. So you're looking through the book, and here's this one that looks totally different, and you go, why did they do that? I don't know. Follow the rules. Read the rules before, follow the rules. So what you want to do is introduce your topic and give a rationale for why you're studying. Again, you don't have to give a rationale for why you're studying a dreaded disease. If you are studying diabetes or heart disease or hypertension, you don't have to convince me this is a bad problem. I think what's more interesting will be for you to convince me what's not known and why it's important to study this thing. What are you trying to measure? What are you trying to accomplish? What are your objectives? What methods are you using? We're using RT-PCR or whatever, but you don't have to say, in a so-and-so thermal cycler at 20, with 16 cycles. Yeah, you don't have room for that. So you want to give enough detail that we believe you know what you're doing without giving so much detail that people fall asleep and that you don't really present any data. What are the results? We've found blah, 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 blah. And what did the results mean? So that last sentence of your abstract needs to wrap up the whole idea. And if possible, kind of go back to that first sentence that said, here's this big problem. So our data show blah, 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 and this opens up more questions in this field or whatever. When you have an abstract for something like a grant, one of the things you might want to say, do not tell me that you are going to identify therapeutic targets as a postdoc or as a junior faculty. Just say, we're going to add to our understanding of this problem. Because it just makes me mad. I'm like, you're not a drug design person. Maybe you'll find targets, but you're just throwing that in because you took some course and they told you to say that. I think it's quite reasonable and quite feasible that you will add to our understanding of how this works, and that that's significant enough for a trainee or for someone in a career transition. Now, I don't think we say that at a meeting. In the meeting abstract, we're going to go back to what that big, this reveals and many more questions to be answered and blah, blah, blah. Or our next experiments will then address blah, blah, blah. What's, again, I think tricky for meeting abstracts is kind of that delay between when you send it in and you may or may not have all your data done and when the meeting's going to be. So what you do and don't say in your abstract, you want to say enough that they believe that you're doing this, and yet, again, we haven't, we got to do 2 more replicates, or we need more patients, we got 5 patients, we need 25 or something. By the time you go to the meeting, you'll have that data. What do you say? What do you say, Dr. Chapman? I mean, how do you weigh that?
Yeah, so I try to never turn out to be totally wrong about what I've said in the abstract, because that's
right.
That's sort of undercuts the validity of what you actually did show in a way. So,
correct.
So I think most people try not to promise too much, and it's just, I think it's better to err on the side of not promising too much.
I think that's true for any abstract as well. Again, to me, we're going to identify therapeutic targets is promising too much, right. Overly ambitious, etc. So I think it is tricky because hopefully the abstract that you're sending to the scientific meeting, by the time you get to the meeting, you will already have a draft or have already sent off your publication regarding this. But so you want to play your cards kind of close to your chest because you don't want to reveal everything, even to the scientific meeting reviewers, because some of them may be people that are working in your field. So it is tricky to balance how much you include so that it sounds like you really have something versus how much you maybe are going to get in the next few months.
And my personal experience is that whenever I've decided I'm going to have these data by the time of the meeting, that's when it doesn't work out right and you don't have it by the time the meeting comes around. So, ideally, if all you can talk about is what's in the abstract, that should be good enough still. So you can always add more if you've learned more and are confident that you're close enough to publishing it that you don't risk other people scooping you on it.
Right.
I tend to not worry so much about getting scooped, but I haven't worked in a field where people are. It's always surprised me that when you look at Nature, the journal, that there will be 3 articles on the very same topic that all come out together. Now, sometimes the editors hold the paper
Right.
2 or 3 weeks so that they do all come out together, to try to be more fair and to make sure that the reader sees different perspectives and can figure out what's really right. But so there are times when people are working, it's just going to be that people are working exactly on the same stuff you are.
Right.
But my sense is that except for that situation, giving people information that it's going to take them a while to gear up what they're doing to be able to compete with you. So it's better to share data more rather than to play things too close to your chest. But I've been scooped a couple of times and it doesn't feel good. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky balance. I think it's a really tricky balance of what can you, how much can you show and how much do you kind of keep to yourself.
So I guess the challenge is that you want your abstract to look like it's going to provide the data that you hope you'll have, because you want to get, most people think it's better to give an oral presentation, and you want to provide enough material
that you get picked.
That you'll get picked. And I guess that's probably true. But sometimes the discussion you have is better in a poster, and you may be better off. Like it's always embarrassing to stand up and.
I know, and people have your abstract going, but you said.
Yeah, not turned out not to be correct. You don't want that to happen too many times in your career.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that, the results part is really the only tricky part. Introducing your topic, what are you trying to measure, how did you do it, that's all pretty straightforward. And it's just kind of how much results do you put in an abstract when you're applying to present at a meeting. And that's where, I think, to be honest, I think your mentor is going to be the best person to determine that. They know who's going to be reading the abstracts, picking them, who's going to be at the meeting, what do we need to kind of show off and what do we not need, to show off. The conclusions, if you have stuff that's not totally finished, it's hard to have hard conclusions. But I think, again, you can kind of give these generic, this has really helped us to better understand the mechanisms involved in whatever this process is. And that's kind of generic, but it's a good way to wrap it up. And it makes a nice abstract. Always think of bookending your abstract between your introductory sentence and your concluding sentence. Don't just let it kind of just dribble off or just, and this and this and this, and then we feel like it just got cut off because you ran out of room. Even if it's just half a, really short little sentence, it's better to have something at the end. So you want to, when you're sending in an abstract to a meeting, and this is maybe the first time you've written an abstract for this kind of meeting, get a copy of the abstract book from the year before. Look at how people, just like I said with the NIH grant abstracts, get some examples, and specifically for that meeting, they should be available. Look at them and get an idea of how they organize them. Which ones did you like and which ones did you think were, what was that about? They kept so much data to themselves, I don't know what they were studying. And then again, read the guidelines for the abstracts. What's the size limit? What's the format? What's the, their font things? Is there stuff about affiliations, etc.? And then, of course, have one of your mentors or all of your mentors or even people down the hall read over the abstract before you submit it. There's nothing worse than, and I hate to say this, there's nothing worse than just simple like typos and things. I reviewed a grant not long ago, and there were so many little typos, and there's just no reason to have typos anymore that I had to say in the comment. The typos were really distracting. So, which meant they threw it together at the last minute. And I understand that, you're writing a grant and we all do it, or you're writing an abstract and you're doing it at the last minute. But if I've got 20 of them and I can only pick 5 and yours was like slapped together, bye-bye, right? So yeah, just make sure you know the rules. Same thing with the grant abstract. Same thing with, you know, a publication abstract. Read the rules. Make sure you know. Look at other examples of them. Find examples you like. There is no, this is the thing I hate, is people tell you, you have to do this. You need to write in your own way, you know, with your own voice. But you will see some, you go, oh, I like the way they organize it. I like the way they started that, and then, oh, I like this sentence at the end, or, oh, I never would, you know, or things you just don't like. So begin to get a feel for how you like to organize your thoughts. And sometimes it's also your project. I have someone who's working on the gut microbiome interaction with lung response to vaccines. So we had to try to get these three things together. We played around, you know, do you start with the gut first, the microbiome first, or the vaccine first, or the lung first? And how interesting it is that the lung and the gut talk to each other. And then, by the way, this vaccine comes in. So we just kept playing with it till it kind of made sense. And I'm sure for most of you, you're going to have two different things. That's how you put them together. Nobody's ever looked at these things together. So try to make sure that it reads, you know, it makes sense. And then what makes sense to you, make sure it makes sense to somebody else. Because you know what you meant, but that doesn't mean the person reading it knows what you meant. So that's why I think it's really important to get some other people to read it. And don't give it to them an hour before it's due. This is due tomorrow. Could you read my whole grant? This is due by 5 o'clock and it's 3:30. Could you read over this? You know, give them enough time. Give them a day or so to be able to give you some feedback. So abstracts for scientific journals, same thing. You need an introduction, the objectives, the methods, the results, and the conclusions. Now, if you're writing for a publication, you have all your data. Or, you know, you may have some data, you know, future studies will look at blah, blah, blah. You might want to keep some of that to yourself. But by the time you're writing something for a publication, everything should be able to be put in this abstract. Now, what format the journal wants the abstract in is going to be different. So again, I think basic science journals tend to have just kind of a running abstract that's just kind of a paragraph, versus clinical journals tend to have a format where they want these little things, our introduction, methods, etc. So again, read the directions. If you're picking a journal, make sure that you're following their directions. And the other thing, again, this is your first impression. I know you guys have done it. You'll go to NCBI and you'll look up a journal article, and the first thing I do is read the abstract. If the abstract's not interesting, I don't read the article because I don't have time to read something that's uninteresting. And what I hate is when the abstract kind of is about one thing and then the article is totally different. Like, who wrote this? Not totally different, but, you know, the abstract will say, this tended to show blah, 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 and then you read it. No, it didn't really tend to show that at all. So make sure that the two things jive. If you're writing, and most of you will write most of your papers at your stage, you're going to be writing with your mentors and collaborators. If you kind of divvy it up, which a lot of times you will, okay, you did most of the, you know, methods, could you write the methods? And you analyze the results, could you write the results section? Go through then when you put these pieces in parts so that they don't sound like 4 people wrote it. My husband gave me a grant and he asked me to read over it, and he said, you know, what do you think? I said, it reads like 4 people wrote it. Like, it's very disjointed. He goes, 4 people did write it. Yeah, I can tell. We need to fix that. So you don't want it, you know, just once you get your pieces and parts together. The same thing with the abstract. You know, if different people are writing, they could give you little pieces and parts that you put into the abstract, but then you want it to sound cohesive, not like it was written by 2 different people or 3 different people. Again, you're writing as a group. That way different people can read it. You can discuss and give yourself enough time to be able to sit down and discuss once you kind of got your first draft of it. What do you think? Did we make the results clear? Are the conclusions like way out there? Are we kind of out on a limb? What do you think? So everybody has enough time to discuss it. You know, everybody wants to publish in Nature and Cell and New England Journal, but the reality is your paper might go in a lesser journal. So what? Who cares? You know, write it as if you were sending it to Nature. And if it's not published by Nature, it's a really well-written article either way. And then the last thing I would like to say, a lot of people do not have English as their native language. That's not a problem. You do good science. Have somebody read over it. At the NIH, they actually have a really cool thing. They have a postdoc association, and postdocs volunteer to help other postdocs by reading over and correcting the grammar and stuff in papers. And it's little things like the wrong tense of a verb, or the wrong, no articles, a, an, or the, those kinds of things that can really take away from the good science that you've done. So, you know, don't be afraid to ask somebody just to read over it for the grammar. Again, it's like the typo thing. There's only so much bad grammar I can take. And in an abstract, you don't have a lot of room. So make sure it is perfect. All right, so read the journal guidelines for formatting the paper in the abstract. Again, clinical journals tend to have a very specific format versus kind of just a ongoing thing. So here's an example of a clinical abstract. It gives the background, methods, results, conclusions. Follow those. Again, you know, just follow, do what they ask for. Do it the way they want it, because that's what their readers are used to looking for. That's what the reviewers are used to looking for. Don't be, you know, a maverick. And I thought, I don't know where I came up with this one or why I picked this one, but I thought this one was really pretty interesting. However, I just realized that the entire background is just 2 sentences. That first sentence is kind of long with a lot of acronyms. Not to critique, and I don't even know who wrote this paper, but I thought this was good. The methods, they use whole exome sequencing, you know, blah, blah, blah. Our study represents successful elucidation of a, you know, disorder. So there's nothing wrong, again, with saying, you know, we found something without having to say it in a, we found something. This is a successful way of doing this, or we're the first ones to put this in 2 and 2 together, or 2 and 5 together. And I like this last sentence. This may have important implications for pulmonary vascular biology. He didn't say, we identify new therapeutic targets. He just said, you know, what we found could be really important. Read our article. Decide for yourself. Versus, and I know what I did. I went in and tried to find something where I thought I'd have some basic science abstract and a clinical abstract. And so this one is kind of the basic science abstract from Nature Genetics on a similar topic. I like this, the first sentence. It's rare, severe disease resulting from progressive obliteration. Oh, okay. I didn't know it was rare. I didn't even know it was a disease, to be honest. But now I want to know what this susceptibility locus is. And this is a really short abstract, but this is Nature Genetics. So, you know, show us the data. Do we have a question or somebody leave?
I think somebody had to leave.
Okay. Again, they don't overpromise at the very last sentence. You know, they just say these are the risk alleles and it's expressed and this is higher in these lungs than in other lungs. So don't over promise because it's just makes you look bad. And you can fill these in, the Mad Libs. And to be honest, these are really true. When I was at the NIH, we have a big retreat every year for our institute and a big poster session. And someone made a fake poster. It had data on it, it had a title, it had an introduction, but it was just the things you always say. So there's nothing wrong with the things that you always say. However, you know, try to think of new ways of saying the things that we always say. So, are there any questions so far? I think, you know, each type of abstract has its own format, it has its own issues, its own problems. But again, I think good writers, and you become good writers by writing and writing and writing. And so the first thing you write is kind of crap, and then it gets better and better. And to be honest, I don't think I'm that good a writer, but I'm an excellent editor. When I was a postdoc, my mentor here at UAB brought in a grant, and he said, I'm getting ready to send this grant out. Could you look it over? You know, just check it. So I made a bunch of edits and comments and things, and I gave it back to him, and he was so upset. And y'all, he had a sentence that didn't have a verb in it. But he had not noticed. Anyway, so he said, what is this? I said, well, you know, you asked me. And so I thought, well, that's fine. I'll never have to do that again. No. The next thing was the paper. I wasn't even on the paper. Could you edit this paper? And then I knew I'd really convinced him when could you edit my congressional testimony? Yep, okay. I'll make sure there's verbs in there. So being able to edit sometimes is, you know, a lot easier than having to start things from scratch. However, I think it's also, you got to start somewhere. And the best way to get better at writing things is just writing. But get some help. Look at examples. And again, find your voice. Find the examples the way you like, you know, what you like may not be organized, may not be the same as somebody else's, but that doesn't make it wrong. Clearly, if it's a, you know, grant abstract and they got the grant, it must have been good enough. But you want your own voice. And don't let anybody tell you that it has to be any specific way. There's just things that need to be in there, and the way you say them, sometimes they'll be better than those people that are telling you this formula for writing things. So, any last questions? Remember, it's your first impression. So make a good impression.
Okay.
All right. And thanks everybody for being online. I think some of the worst of the rain's over, maybe.
Yeah. So thanks very much, Paula. And I just want to remind people that you should be working on your abstracts. I think Dr. Gregory will be willing to help us look over them and provide feedback.
Sure.
So the actual oral presentation phase of this course starts at, it's either the last week of May or the first week of June. We'd like to have you send in your abstracts by the end of the first week of May, so we have time to give you some feedback. We'll send an email out to make sure everybody knows this. And we're not going to enforce a specific format on you because some of you are writing grants, some of you are submitting to a meeting, but you can use whatever format is appropriate for what you're doing. Just it all has to, well, I think it can't be more than 225 words, which is sort of, some places will allow up to 250 for a meeting abstract, but anyway, so you're not writing a book, you're writing a distillation of what you're doing, and we'll be glad to give you feedback. And if you have questions before you or as you're working and want to get some feedback along the way, we'll be happy to help as well. And certainly don't ever go to New Orleans without.
Yeah, if you come to New Orleans, you better call me. I'll take you out.
Right. Okay, any last questions?
All right.
Let me make sure.
Yeah, that patient one, boy, that's a big
Okay,
one. So I had somebody, she's writing a
thanks very much. We're signing off.
K-23 on hemophilia. And she runs the Louisiana Hemophilia Clinic. It's just an existing